Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. I trust you had a good weekend. Let me start with a short interview I did with CCTV Africa, why Africa should pay attention to Xi Jinping's state visit to the United States. And I was arguing that basically a functional relationship between the two is a net gain for Africa. A bipolar relationship is not. Macro Thoughts, Markets Gone Mad by Mike Whitney. Imagine your doctor puts you on a daily dose of OxyContin, phenobarbital and Quaaludes for 6 years straight. Then he suddenly cancelled your prescription. Do you think your behavior might become a bit erratic? That's what's going on with the stock market. Home thoughts, I chased the moon all morning, never saw it was way too cloudy. And that took me to Robert Frost. We ran as if to meet the moon. I'll put up a photograph that I took yesterday evening of the moon, and it was very bright and luminescent and luminous. But I did not manage to catch a glimpse of it this morning. Astro Pula. This super blonde moon has been notoriously hiding behind clouds, but M. Whitaker from Poole, United Kingdom, got this clean shot. That took me to E. Cummings. Who knows if the moon's a balloon coming out of a keen city in the sky filled with pretty people. And then Copacabana Beach, Rio de Janeiro, another supermoon shot. Political reflections. In geopolitics, this is the greatest show on earth. For the best part of a week, the world's leaders, more than 150 of them, will mingle, bargain and argue over the state of the world at the UN General Assembly in New York. My piece over the weekend is called When Beijing Came to Washington. President Xi Jinping and the First Lady Peng Liyuan made their first state visit to Washington last week. The Chinese president found himself in a triple header: Pope Francis, who was visiting at the same time, and the Congress Speaker, John Boehner, who chose to resign. In a Darwinian fight for the airwaves and share of voice, the Chinese president got relegated to third place behind the Pope and Boehner. Representative Nancy Pelosi of California, the Democratic leader in the House, learned about Boehner's resignation when she read a breaking news alert on a staff member's phone. God knows what's next over there, she told staff members. The Pope is a 21st century rock star. It's quite an achievement that President Xi Jinping made sure his signal was received loud and clear through the noise. Winston Churchill said of Russia in October 1939, I cannot forecast to you the action of Russia. It is a riddle wrapped in a mystery, inside an enigma. President Jinping has cultivated a similarly enigmatic persona. What was very interesting is how Xi Jinping elected to lift the veil a little. He selected Seattle for this personal unveiling. He alluded to the House of Cards. This has nothing to do with power struggle. In this case, there is no House of Cards, he said. Mentioned that his favourite book was Ernest Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea, and two quotes from that novel grabbed my attention. I think perhaps I can too, but I try not to borrow. First you borrow, then you beg. This might be uppermost in his mind, given how Presidents Nicolas Maduro, Eduardo dos Santos, Joseph Kabila, amongst others, have come begging of late. And this is one of my favourite passages. I'm as clear as the stars that are my brothers. Still I must sleep, they sleep, and the moon and the sun sleep, and even the ocean sleeps sometimes on certain days, when there is no current in a flat calm. Z said he visited the El Floridita bar in Havana to sample the mojitos at one of the writer's preferred haunts. It is clear that the US-China relationship undergirds the 21st century world. So much depends on that relationship being a functional, not a bipolar one. The President again said, as an old Chinese saying goes, peaches and plums do not talk, yet a path is formed beneath them. The key challenge for China remains how the apex manages the inevitable slowdown in GDP expansion. It's slowing and really fast. Recent interventions in the stock market have appeared very ham-fisted and ineffective. Questions have been raised about the handling of the macroeconomy. The President chose to assure the crowd that China's stock market had reached the phase of self-recovery and self-adjustment. The President fused his Chinese dream with the American dream in a clever elision. Link said this to Bloomberg: Xi's goal is to do a word performance that will have two effects. One, back home, to make him look great to the Chinese people, and especially to his political rivals, and two, to bamboozle the Americans into temporary immobility. The American hosts, with rare exceptions, will be bamboozled. So I thought it was a very sophisticated and nuanced engagement. The President drew the sting out of what could have been a nasty war of words over the belief in the US that the Chinese are like jockeys on the information superhighway, waging cyber war on USA Inc. This relationship could turn bipolar on a dime. The pivot to Asia, which remains the defining US document with respect to China, is all about containment. However, for now, Jinping spoke to a higher ground, invigorated the pro-China establishment in the US, and he set the narrative. Pretty effective politics, in my view. Challenges remain, however. The stock market could tank again. GDP might slow down even further. But then the premier will be sacrificed. The modern-day emperor is no slouch. And Reuters had an article, Fated in China, Xi's US profile dims in shadow of Pope. And saying that, for most Americans it was a sideshow. The main news networks were deep in their fourth straight day of blanket coverage of Pope Francis' historic US visit. From August 26 to September 25, tweets in the United States about Francis topped 765,000, compared to 107,000 for Xi. On television, the Pope was mentioned over 25 times more, online 4 times more than Xi. To be contrasted with someone who has no military, no economic might, and be completely eclipsed, I think it's astounding. I don't think the Chinese are noticing the contrast in the messages. Ming Xia, political science professor at New York City's University, who traveled to take part in an anti-Xi protest outside the White House, said the Pope's humility during his visit had highlighted what he called Xi's arrogance. The Pope was praying with the homeless and said we're all equal. In the eyes of God, the real Father, Xi thinks he's the father of the Chinese people. He has assumed the power of God. Gerard O'Connell tweeted on September 22nd, the Pope has arrived in Santiago de Cuba. I like the photograph. And then I was reading an article in the New York Review of Books, and in it says Xi is not primus inter pares, like Xiang in Hu. He is simply primus. The Star tweeted the Pontifex ditches customary limo, starts US tour in modest Fiat. On the 24th of August, I wrote about how China was roiling the markets. I quoted an IMF official who said it's totally premature to speak of a crisis in China. And I was saying, the further problem is that no one believes the data. This moment when the market stops suspending its disbelief is seriously a dangerous one for policymakers. And then on the 7th of September, I said China must fix its economy despite military show. On Sunday, Xi was joined by Vladimir Putin, who also picked the Waldorf Astoria for his first stay in Manhattan in a decade. Narendra Modi, Nawaz Sharif are there as well. Merkel will be getting her beauty sleep at the Mandarin Oriental. And Rousseff at the Plaza Athene in Lenox Hill. Let me put up a photograph of the Waldorf Astoria in New York. Another photograph of Barack Obama and Vladimir Putin. And over the weekend I concluded that Putin remains a geopolitical grandmaster, dealing himself a trump card in Syria. Russia, of course, has built up its Syrian airbase as US policy suffers a setback. For the past 2 weeks, and again today, a Russian cargo plane has landed every morning at Hamim, the source said, adding they all had fighter escorts. One Syrian official called Russia's military involvement a turning point. Hassan Nasrallah, leader of Hezbollah, said Russia's military support would affect the evolution of the ongoing battle in Syria. I think Erdogan has read the writing on the wall, evidently suing for peace and trying to get some of his pieces out of Syria, going by his recent visit to Moscow. Put up a photograph of Erdogan visiting the mosque that Turkey built in Moscow. The Saudi king and Vladimir Putin also discussed the Syrian conflict. I said everyone is trying to protect their protégés from the wrath of Putin. Erdogan last week, Saudi king yesterday. Then let me stay with Saudi Arabia, where they're threatening to execute Ali Mohammed al-Nimr for anti-government protests. He was 17 at the time. And it took me back to Kapuscinski. The choice of that moment is the greatest riddle of history. It is authority that provokes revolution. This occurs when a feeling of impunity takes root among the elite. We allowed anything, we can do anything. This is a delusion, but it rests on a certain rational foundation. For a while, it does indeed look as if they can do whatever they want. Scandal after scandal after scandal, and illegality after illegality go unpunished. The people remain silent. They are afraid and do not yet feel their own strength. At the same time, they keep a detailed account of the wrongs, which at one particular moment are to be added up. The choice of that moment is the greatest riddle of history. What is a disloyal payment? This is what Sepp Blatter is being accused of. In the world of financial crime, which this is, it is a payment made by an employee that is against the interest of the employer. As president of FIFA, Blatter is obliged to act in the best financial interest of the organization. It is the Swiss Attorney General's view that this payment was made against FIFA's best interests. I concluded by saying the Emperor Joseph S. Blatter has no clothes. Christine Lagarde said a forecast of 3.3% growth this year is no longer realistic. A forecast of 3.8% for next year, neither. We will, however, remain above the 3% threshold. IMF is due to release updated economic forecasts in October. Holger RBS calls this the most dangerous chart in the world. Inflation expectations turned back down, despite ECB QE and zero US interest rates. Currency markets, euros at 111.70, dollar index around the 96.30 level, but a little bit off 96.70, which was the high from Friday. Dollar yen 120.33, Swissy 0.974, the pound 151.87, Aussie 0.7029. It's drifting up from lows of 0.6936 seen last week. India rupee 66.132, South Korean won 11.9379. Rial is still below 4 at 397.49. Egyptian pound 783.14 and the rand 1389.83. Put up a 3-month chart of the dollar index. My target remains above 100 by the year end. Euro dollar, where my target is 104 by year end, but I'm not as convicted about that as I am about the dollar index. Holger again, Brazil even more damaged than brand Volkswagen when measured by 5-year default probability derived from CDSs. Commodity markets, gold was last trading at 1145. I think the 1155 area will repel the recent advance, and again, crude oil $45.28. I think it's flatlining ahead of another tumble. Saudi Arabia withdraws up to $70 billion from overseas funds to cut deficit as default probability doubled. Venezuela's economic crisis to only get worse as Barclays. Venezuela is suffering the deepest economic crisis in its history. Output expected to contract 9.1% this year, Barclays said on Friday. Economic contraction will likely reach 16.5% between 2014 and 2016, while inflation over that period will exceed 1,000%, Barclays wrote in a note to clients. It is impossible to understand why the government is not reacting to this reality, why it has not taken measures to alleviate the economic distortions that are destroying the real income of Venezuelans. I wrote about this when I said the end is nigh for crude oil producers from Caracas to Luanda, from Riyadh to Abuja. Pedro da Costa tweeted the front cover from November 2009 on The Economist. It was all about Brazil rising, sinking now. Let's move on to Africa. Capital Economics is forecasting tepid growth of just 3.8% in the region as a whole next year. Its analysts describe the consensus around Africa as still far too bullish, despite the decline in optimism triggered by China's troubles. The firm forecasts tepid growth of just 3.8% in the region as a whole next year. Was particularly concerned about Nigeria, whose government, it argued, is engineering a slow-motion economic crisis by squeezing liquidity out of the economy. Going back to that interview I did with CCTV, Africa, I said, does not want to get into a situation of a Cold War. It wants a situation where the global economy is working, and when the two most powerful economies are collaborating together, it gives more oxygen to Africa. If the relationship between Obama and Xi Jinping is functional, that is a net gain for the African continent. 31st of August, I wrote how China's volatility is causing influenza across Africa. It still is. For a second time in 2 weeks, Mozambique opposition leader caught up in a gunfight. The report that I had said 10 died. They're now saying 20 died. It's still unclear what exactly happened. Ratings agency downgrades Zambia. Its currency is also the worst performing in the world. Kwacha has fallen 41% against the dollar this year, the worst performance amongst the world's currencies. Yields on Zambia's $1.25 billion of Eurobonds maturing in 2027 have climbed to 11.4%, from 9.4% when they were sold in July. CCM Tanzania tweeted a photograph of their helicopter, which is going around campaigning. Let me put that up. Luanda seeks a Eurobond lifeline. This is the Africa Confidential. Plans to raise $1.5 billion from a bond issue are being revived in the hope of making up the drastic shortfall in government revenue. Delegation starts its tour hoping to offer a yield of below 8% with a maturity of 10 years, but they may well be forced to offer more, given a drastic economic situation, one insider said. Very interesting piece in the Africa Confidential article about Burkina Faso. The people take on the putschists, and lots of detail around the RSP seem to be reporting to beautiful blaze. I concluded by saying, the signal has not been drowned out. In fact, events as they unfolded confirm that the street is infinitely more powerful than the putschists. That took me back to what I wrote in 2014, Ouagadougou's signal to sub-Saharan Africa. Thousands of people have staged a mass demonstration in Congo's capital, Brazzaville, to protest against plans by veteran ruler Denis Sassou Nguesso to try to extend his rule. Sunday's rally was the biggest since Sassou Nguesso returned to power in 1997. Protesters stretching for almost a kilometre along the main boulevard in the city centre. Gunmen attacked a police station in Burundi's capital, but that's a regular occurrence these days. South African all shares up 1.13% this year. Dollar rand, I'll put up a 3-month chart. Looks as if we're going to post new lows. Egyptian pound around the 783 level. Egyptian EGX 30 is down 17.7% year to date. Nigeria ticked higher, 0.38%. Ghana unchanged on Friday. Kenya does an about turn, abolishes the capital gains tax and a withholding tax of 0.3% on all securities traded. And this is something I wrote in September when I said policymakers need to be ahead of the curve. Clearly they've now got to be very cognizant of market activity. It's better to take a smaller cut and get more volume. Safaricom is rallying 12.639% over the last 4 weeks. Have a look at the interview I did with Bob Collymore a little while back. KCB is up 11.36% this month alone. Have a look at the interview I did with Joshua Oigara not too long ago. Kenya shilling is weak at 105.635. And this is even with a massive surge in yields. Benchmark 91-day Treasury bill jumped an astonishing 4.121 percentage points to 18.6% in Thursday's auction. That's not a good sign. It will surely attract money out of the stock market to the bond market. Nairobi all-share is down 8.94% year to date. Nairobi NSE 20 is down 17.44% year to date. Interesting article in The Economist, climbing aboard the Africa train, talking about a long line of smoke-belching lorries clogs the highway for miles outside Mombasa, Kenya's main port. They're waiting to collect shipping containers that they will haul across 1,200 grinding kilometers to Kampala. Doing so is slow and costly. Yet for a quarter of a century, this was the only viable way of shipping goods into East Africa's interior. Moribund Railway was even slower, thoroughly unreliable. At best, it would take 12 days to move a container by train. Today, a procession of brightly painted locomotives belonging to RVR are taking an increasing share of the load. The time to send a container by rail has fallen by more than half. For the first time in decades, the trains are running on time. Now as much as 10% of the traffic out of Mombasa is carried by rail, double the share of a few years ago. New wagons and locomotives may double their share again. Friday, the biggest trade was BAT, which surged 6.67%, closed at a 4-week high of 800, traded 1.4% of its shares. But clearly we're going to have to keep an eye on bond yields because they're the curve for fly in the ointment, as it were. Let's see how the stock market behaves today. Once again, thank you. Wishing you a great week.